I used to be the king of procrastination. Seriously, my to-do lists were basically graveyards for good intentions. I would feel that familiar dread in my stomach, watch a deadline creep up, and then suddenly decide it was the perfect time to reorganize my bookshelf. By color. I was completely convinced I was just lazy, that my work ethic was fundamentally broken, that some people had the discipline gene, and I did not. But then, one simple question, a question I had never once thought to ask myself, blew up every excuse I had, and changed everything. Being the king of procrastination is not a glamorous job. My days were ruled by this constant low-grade anxiety. I would wake up with a solid plan. Today is the day. Today I would finally tackle that project, write that important email, start that new routine. I had the time, I had the skills. On a logical level, I knew getting it done would feel incredible. But the moment of truth would arrive. And right on cue, this invisible force would yank me in the opposite direction. My brain, which had been clear and motivated an hour before, would instantly become a factory for rationalizations. You should probably do more research first. You will do better work when you feel more inspired. Just answer a few emails. Get the small stuff out of the way. Those few emails turned into an hour of inbox diving. Then I noticed my desk was cluttered. Cannot work in chaos, right? An hour of cleaning later, a pang of hunger. Cannot work on an empty stomach. And the cycle kept going. Psychologist Neil Fiore, in his book The Now Habit, made a discovery that stopped me cold when I first read it. He found that procrastination is not a time management problem. It is an emotional regulation problem. We do not avoid tasks because we are bad at managing time. We avoid them because they trigger feelings we do not want to feel. The worst part was not the all-nighters or the mediocre last-minute work. It was the slow, quiet erosion of my self-respect. Every broken promise chipped away at my own confidence. Procrastination was not just something I did. It was becoming who I was. My rock bottom came during a week where two major deadlines collided. A critical work report, and a personal project I had been dreaming about for months. I had weeks to prepare. I used those weeks for everything but the actual work. Deep cleaned my apartment, alphabetized my spice rack, watched a 3-part documentary on the history of mapmaking. The night before both were due, I was just sitting there. Blank page, blinking cursor, mocking me. Steven Pressfield calls this resistance in his book, The War of Art. He describes it as an invisible force that rises up every time we attempt to do meaningful work. His central argument is this: the more important something is to you, the stronger the resistance you will feel toward it. That is not weakness. That is the signal you are on the right path. Sitting in my apartment at 2 a.m., surrounded by evidence of my self-sabotage, a memory surfaced, a conversation with an old mentor. I had been complaining about putting things off, framing it the usual way. I am just a lazy person. He listened patiently. Then, instead of giving me a productivity system or a new app to try, he asked me one very simple, very direct question. Back then, I brushed it off. Seemed too simple, too psychological. I wanted a checklist, not introspection. But now, in that silence at 2 a.m., his question echoed with complete clarity. The question was this: what are you actually afraid of? For years, I had diagnosed myself as lazy. But here is the thing. Laziness is a judgment. It is not a reason. Fear is a reason. That question completely reframed my entire struggle. Brené Brown writes about this in Daring Greatly. She argues that underneath most of our self-defeating behaviors, avoidance, perfectionism, procrastination, is vulnerability. The fear of being seen trying and failing. The fear of putting yourself out there and having it not be enough. We do not avoid hard things because we are weak. We avoid them because we care about them deeply. For the work report, I was terrified of failure, scared I would pour everything into it and it still would not be good enough. By putting it off, I was subconsciously writing myself an excuse. Of course, it was not my best work. I did it in one night. I was protecting my ego from the possibility of trying my hardest and still falling short. For the personal project, the thing I was genuinely passionate about, the fear was stranger. I was afraid of being judged. What if I launched it and nobody cared? But even deeper than that, I was afraid of success. What if it actually worked? Then there would be expectations. It would become a real thing, part of my identity. And that felt terrifyingly vulnerable. The task was never the problem. The problem was the emotions the task stirred up. Anxiety, self-doubt, fear of judgment, fear of imperfection. For the first time, I was not looking at my own behavior with judgment. I was looking at it with curiosity. And that shift changed everything. Once I understood that fear was the real enemy, my whole approach changed. I stopped trying to force my way through with willpower. That is like yelling at an alarm bell to shut up. Instead, I started treating resistance as a signal. That feeling of dread was just my brain saying, "We are scared of something here." My job was to listen and deal with what was underneath. The first thing I adopted was what James Clear calls the 2-minute rule in Atomic Habits. Whatever you are avoiding, find the version of it you can do in less than 2 minutes. Instead of write the report, my new task became open the document and write one sentence. Anyone can do that. And then something like physics kicks in. An object in motion stays in motion. Starting, even microscopically, breaks the inertia of fear. That one sentence turned into a paragraph. That paragraph turned into a page. I was not trying to finish. I was just trying to start. The second shift came from psychologist Kristin Neff. In her book, Self-Compassion, she makes the case that treating yourself with the same kindness you would extend to a friend is not weakness. It is what actually unlocks high performance. So I gave myself explicit permission to be messy. I called my initial attempts the awful first draft. The goal was not quality. It was to get something, anything, down. When you know it is okay to produce something imperfect, the fear of starting shrinks. You are not trying to create a masterpiece on your first try. You are just getting sand in the sandbox so you have something to build with later. Finally, whenever I felt that old familiar urge to run, I would pause, take a breath, and ask the question, what am I actually afraid of right now? Just naming it. I am afraid this is going to be hard, or I am afraid people will not like this. Zapped so much of its power. It is like turning on the lights and realizing the monster in the closet is just a pile of clothes. Once you can see the fear clearly, you can reason with it. The goal stops being to eliminate fear. It becomes to act alongside it. Neil Fiore, Stephen Pressfield, Brené Brown, James Clear, Kristin Neff, they all point to the same truth from different angles. The obstacle is not time. It is not discipline. It is the uncomfortable emotions we have been running from. Procrastination is not a character flaw. It is a protective instinct that has gone a little haywire. That feeling of dread is a compass pointing directly at a fear you need to gently face. So the next time you find yourself putting something off, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself that one question. What am I actually afraid of? Do not scratch the surface. Dig. You might discover that understanding your fear is the first and most important step to finally getting things done. If this hit home, give this video a like and subscribe for more on the psychology of a more fulfilling life. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What task have you been putting off? And what do you think the real fear behind it might be? You are definitely not alone in this.